Hello and welcome. My name is Tom Pesek, and I'm Senior Liaison Officer at the Food and Agriculture Organization's Liaison Office for North America in Washington, D.C. And I have the pleasure of serving as moderator of today's virtual congressional briefing on agritourism, resources for COVID-19 recovery and farm viability. On behalf of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and the University of Vermont Extension, with support from the office of U.S. Senator Patrick Leahy, I would like to welcome and thank all of you for joining today's congressional briefing. In particular, I would like to thank the many congressional staffers joining despite their heavy workloads and the many competing demands on their limited time. Agritourism, the focus of this congressional briefing, has the potential to provide significant benefits to farmers and rural communities. These include contributions to food security and nutrition, overall farm viability and sustainability, increased rural economic development and employment, as well as improved agricultural literacy. Agritourism also provides farmers with an important and effective vehicle for diversifying and generating additional income through on-farm touristic activities, and it thereby helps to strengthen their resilience to shocks or disruptions to their operations. Agritourism has long played an integral role in ensuring the viability and sustainability of farmers and rural communities by providing an additional income stream. And as we move beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, agricultural producers need additional sources of revenue, and families are seeking healthy outdoor experiences as well as fresh, locally produced food. These enterprises at the farm community tourism nexus allow communities and visitors alike to be part of preserving the working landscape, creating jobs, stimulating the rural economy, maintaining farming traditions, sustaining cultural identities, improving food security and nutrition, as well as educating the public about agriculture and attracting young people, especially those from more urban environments, to rural farming ones. Before proceeding with our program, there are a few important housekeeping items I would like to cover. Firstly, I would like to advise you that this event is being recorded and that a link to the recording will be shared with all who have registered after the event. Please feel free to let us know who you are and where you're joining us from in the Zoom chat box. Please use the Zoom Q&A box to ask your questions, stating your name and affiliation, if any, and to whom your question is directed. I will not be able to make full and proper introductions for our distinguished speakers due to time constraints. However, their full biographies will be made available to you in the Zoom chat box. Lastly, I would like to briefly provide an outline of how our event today will be structured. In a moment, we will hear from Andrew Bahrenburg from the office of Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont. We will then have the good fortune of hearing from Dr. Lisa Chase from the University of Vermont Extension. We will then hear from Gail Chihak, Tribal Relations and Outreach Manager from the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association. We will then hear from Rusty Rumley, Senior Staff Attorney at the National Agricultural Law Center in Arkansas. And last, but certainly not least, we will then hear from Dr. Carrie Castile, Director of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's National Institute for Food and Agriculture, or NIFA. We will then transition to the Q&A portion of our program, at which time I will begin posing questions from you, our audience, to our speakers based upon your entries in the Zoom Q&A box. And we will endeavor to end the session promptly at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So without further ado, I would like to invite Andrew Bahrenburg, who serves as Legislative Assistant for U.S. Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont, to get us started with welcoming remarks. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks for everyone for joining us this afternoon. I promise to be very brief here because we do have an outstanding panel, and this is certainly a rangy topic, as evidenced by that panel and the interests represented here. And being the target audience as a Senate staffer, I certainly want to hear what they have to say. Senator Leahy's interest in this goes back a ways, having served on the Ag Committee since the day he arrived in the Senate, having chaired it previously. Vermont really sits at the nexus of a lot of these issues and have served to benefit Vermont's ag economy. small scale farming, the dairy sector, locally branded value added products like maple and cheese, and local foods have long been cornerstones for Vermont's economy. But so too is tourism and outdoor rec, which has in some cases led to revitalization of a lot of the rural communities that have been impacted by various economic downturns in the past. That plus Vermont's proximity to Quebec and major East Coast cities has given our state some expertise on the matter, and really forced, I think, Vermont policymakers and we here in the Senator's office to grapple with a lot of the policy issues surrounding agritourism, and there are many. And it's important, I think, for us as staff to help do the same, especially with an eye toward a farm bill, and as our especially rural economies in all of our states look to recover from the past year. So of course, when University of Vermont was in the lead in planning this year-long international agritourism conference, it was not a hard sell to get us involved and the senator involved. And of course, then 2020 happened, and here we are on Zoom. But I think the timing here is helpful. On the one hand, as Tom said, I mean, the pandemic and the shutdown have for a time kind of dampened the ability of people to visit certain places, including farms. But it's also, it has also led to some renewed interest, I think, in things like direct farm sales, on-farm pickups, and really shortening the distance between consumer and farmer. And I think, frankly, a lot of farmers have either pivoted to meet that demand or are otherwise taken fresh looks at their business models. And of course, there is a great deal of pent up demand for not only travel, but for, as Tom said, outdoor experiences. I think there is a potential bow wave coming in this field of agritourism. And so, as I said, on the staff level, the question is how prepared are farms in our states to capture that demand? How prepared are state agencies and state laws to help them do it? By now, most states have some version of agritourism laws on the books. A small handful, including Vermont, have agritourism-specific laws that have certainly helped. And of course, there are federal policies, as I'm excited that Carrie will be able to walk us through, that can help farmers really capture this demand. But there's obviously a lot to untangle here. The amount of liability issues, land use, zoning, recreation, taxation, you name it. And I think a lot of the farmers, I'm sure that folks attending this briefing have spoken to have really been on the forefront of untangling those issues, both formally and informally. And so I think it's past time for us to really wrap our heads around it and try and see what's coming here. Even coming up with a definition of agritourism that certainly merits more than a 1 hour briefing, but this is a start. So I'm very pleased to have the guests that we do. Thank them for spending some time with us, helping us understand this issue better. Thanks to UVM and FAO and to the Ag Committee staff for helping us get the word out and supporting this briefing. So I will kick it back over to you, Tom, and really look forward to the panel.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew, for kicking us off with those excellent remarks. And of course, as always, thanks to the Senator for his leadership and support. I now have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Lisa Chase, Natural Resources Specialist at the University of Vermont Extension and Director of the Vermont Tourism Research Center, to tell us a bit about agritourism and why it matters. And her remarks will be followed by a brief video featuring producers from around the United States. Lisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Andrew, and our panelists and everyone for joining us today. I'm going to talk a little bit about what agritourism is, take a look at trends, and then close with a short video, as Tom mentioned. I first heard the term agritourism 20 years ago when I was applying for my current job on the faculty at University of Vermont Extension. I wasn't familiar with the term, so I asked about a dozen different people what this agritourism thing was, and I got almost a dozen different answers. Fortunately, two of the people I asked were farmers who had recently traveled to Ireland and Italy on trade missions with Senator Leahy, where they had learned about agritourism in Europe and experienced it firsthand. Those farmers returned to Vermont with a vision for agritourism as economic development, not only for their farms, but also for their communities. They understood the ripple effect of successful agritourism that can create jobs far beyond the farm families that open their doors to visitors. This tradition of traveling and gathering on farms and ranches has probably been around in some shape or form since the beginning of agriculture. Native tribes traveled long distances for planting and harvesting feasts and ceremonies. Europeans immigrating to the US then brought their own traditions, many centered around gatherings on farms. In the 1800s, migrants traveling west would spend the night at a farmhouse in exchange for payment or helping with the chores. As the US has become increasingly urbanized, families living in cities would visit farms to escape the summer heat of the city and learn about farming and rural life. That continued into the early 1900s with the rise of dude ranches in the West and festivals for special crops throughout the US, like the Apple Blossom Festival in Wenatchee, Washington, that began in 1920 and still continues to this day. Spending time on farms and celebrating agriculture was a regular part of life for most Americans 100 years ago, when 70% of this country's employment was in agriculture. Today, less than 2% of US employment is on farms. Just a few generations ago, most people had some sort of personal farming connection, whether it was through family, friends, or neighbors. But nowadays, visiting farms and ranches is a rare and a very special experience for most Americans. And research is finding increasing evidence about the health benefits and even the therapeutic effects of spending time in nature and on farms. Our urbanized society owes a debt of gratitude to the many producers throughout the US that offer agritourism. And by agritourism, we mean working farms, ranches, and vineyards that are open to visitors for product sales and experiences. And these experiences include a wide variety of activities ranging from education, hospitality with overnight farm stays, entertainment, and recreation. While agritourism clearly is very beneficial for visitors, the consumers, in many ways, producers do benefit quite a bit as well. Clearly, there are additional sources of income and diversification of revenue streams for producers. There's also the opportunity to create more jobs on the farm and different types of jobs that require different skills. While that can be challenging for farmers focused on food production, these different types of jobs also can be valuable for farm families wanting to keep the next generation on the land. And that next generation could be their very own children, or it might be new and aspiring farmers, future generations of farmers. Another benefit for producers is the opportunity to share their agricultural heritage and educate the non-farming public about food, fiber, and fuel production, and also stewardship of healthy ecosystems and working lands. Through a USDA NIFA study, we surveyed almost 2,000 producers with agritourism, representing all 50 states. And we learned that the vast majority, almost 90%, are motivated by more than profitability. Educating the public and building goodwill in their communities are goals for these producers, along with generating income, of course. This farm community connection is especially important for small farms, which make up 90% of the farms in the US. But I want to be clear that agritourism can be found on farms of all sizes and all types. from dairy to fruits and vegetables, to livestock, to aquaculture, and value-added products like wine and beer, salsa and jam, and soaps and lotions. The list goes on and on. We've taken a look at trends over time using the best source available, which is the USDA Census of Agriculture. They first used the term agritourism in 2007 with a question, and I'm quoting, the wording was agritourism and recreational services such as farm or winery tours, hay rides, hunting, fishing, etc. Even with that limited scope, agritourism by that definition grew by 67% over 10 years. And it more than doubled when you include direct sales of agricultural products, which is often part of the definition of agritourism. According to the most recent Census of Agriculture in 2017, combined on-farm experiences and direct sales brought in $3.7 billion in revenues for over 150,000 farms and ranches throughout the country. Now, I realize that for some of you, those numbers may sound relatively small. That number of farms represents just 7% of the farms in the US. Although I will point out that it is a much greater percentage in certain states, like here in Vermont, where more than a quarter of our farms connect directly with consumers through sales and experiences. Needless to say, there is a lot of potential for expansion.
Agritourism has become really an international phenomenon.
We truly use a lot of this agritourism as a mechanism to offset the cost of all of the other functionalities that exist with running a ranch.
I spend a lot of time trying to convince people to come over from France to visit, to see a real connection between growing food, consuming food, and taking care of the land. And it's something that speaks to Europeans very closely, that connection between real food, not fake food, taking care of the land. And I think it's something that can attract Europeans.
We open our farm to visitors year-round and during open farm week for a few reasons. One, because we really want to share it. We want people to understand how their food is grown and that it can be grown sustainably and that can be delicious and really good for you. And it's also a piece of enabling our farm to survive, because it's not easy to grow food and sell it and have the farm survive. I mean, everyone sort of knows that. And so the tourism piece partners really nicely and allows people another way to support local farms.
You'd be surprised how many people have never seen women farmers, let alone Black women farmers, let alone LGBTQ women farmers. And so, you know, we started this journey to make sure that racial justice and inclusion was at the forefront of what we were doing. And so we thought about, you know, agritourism. How can people come and view our farm and look at our farm? Because believe it or not, we had so many people. We have friends, we have family, we have fans that want to follow our journey. And sometimes that can be difficult. And so what we started to do is think of a plan in terms of agritourism and what that would look like. It's not about having people coming to our farm to buy our product. It's people coming to our farm to understand their relationship to land and power.
I have seen it go from, in 1984, when we started the guest business, people just thought, oh, that's interesting that you would have people come to your farm, and not being particularly supportive, to now it's gone all the way to the other extreme where being a farmer is cool, yeah. And really exciting. It's like, wow, a farm.
Thank you, Lisa, for that excellent overview on the importance of agritourism. and for sharing that video. I would now like to turn to Rusty Rumley, Senior Staff Attorney at the National Agricultural Law Center in Arkansas. And Rusty will address agritourism liability issues and resources, among others. Rusty, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom. So one thing that both Lisa and Andrew talked about was there are a lot of legal issues that seem to go along with running an agritourism operation. And it's something that we deal with quite frequently here at the center. So just a little bit about us. We serve kind of most of you guys will be familiar with cooperative extension. We serve as kind of like a cooperative extension when it comes to the entire country, when it comes to legal issues dealing with agriculture, the environment, and food law. We are a nonpartisan institution, and we cannot provide legal advice. But one thing that we do is we do congressional briefings quite frequently. We travel around the country speaking with agritourism associations, state departments of agriculture, or other groups, and we're always available to conduct briefings or talks on a wide range of issues, including agritourism, zoning, contracts, and the like that we see coming up with agritourism, the agritourism industry. Here's our website. We have plenty of free resources. One thing that we always stress here at the center is that our job is not to provide legal advice, but our job is to provide lawmakers and producers with the information that they need in order to make decisions, whether that might be going and consulting with an attorney that can represent them, or looking at other states or other federal laws to see what's already on the books. That's the kind of services that we provide here at the center. I was specifically asked to talk about agritourism statutes themselves. As Andrew had mentioned, we're over half of the states have an agritourism statute. Vermont is the most recent addition, and theirs is going to be starting here in the first of next month. But for agritourism operations in the United States, one of the main issues that they deal with is the concept of liability. You have one of the issues is inviting all of these people onto your farm is that inevitably someone's going to get injured, and what can the agritourism operation do in order to protect themselves? From the federal perspective, there's really not a lot that's done at this level when it comes to agritourism statutes and for liability. This is primarily a state issue. What I want to do is serve as more as a resource for staffers. Like if you guys have one of these questions come in, please feel free to send the people on to me. Like I said, this is typically not an area that's dealt with at the federal level. This is much more of a state and local law area. One thing that we run into that's such an issue with agriculture, and it's something that Lisa talked about, is that when people come onto the farm and they get injured, there's not really a defense that helps most of these farmers out. There is an old common law defense, and it's called assumption of the risk. And the best example I can give you of this is to talk about, the differences between like American football and agriculture. When football players step onto the field and someone's injured, can someone sue? And the answer is no, generally they can't. And the reason for that is, when people step foot on the football field, they know that it's a violent sport. Even people that have no background with American football realize that as a full contact sport, people are going to be injured. So it's insulated from the American legal system. Agriculture is different. As Lisa mentioned, less than 2% of the American public has anything to do with agriculture. When you couple that with agriculture can be a fairly dangerous endeavor to get into. I used these numbers from 2015 because I know that these numbers are incorrect. I actually had a great uncle that was killed in a hay baler accident this year, and it was not reported as an ag-related death. But if you look at this, compare it to other occupations, 86 law enforcement officers were killed in the same in that same time frame. But when you look at this, like the high rates of death, and that's not even counting injuries, And then you look at the number of people that are involved in agriculture and what people know about agriculture, it kind of sets up a scenario where people running agritourism operations really need to be careful. The best example I can give of, and people running agritourism operations can talk about this, is the level of knowledge that a lot of the American public has about agriculture is pretty limited. I've been on agritourism operations, and not just the children, but the parents will ask, well, which one of these cows gives the chocolate milk? So, I mean, when parents have that little knowledge of, chocolate milk doesn't come straight from the cow, how can people be expected to accept the risks of being on a farm if they know literally nothing about a farming operation at all? So these statutes have been an important tool to educate the public and to reduce that risk for people, for the agritourism operators, for providing these services. And one thing that the center does is we maintain a compilation of all the state statutes out there that are currently in existence. Vermont's is not up yet because Vermont's is not in effect yet, but it will be the next one going up shortly. Like I said, here's my contact information. If there's anything that we can do here at the center, as I said, we're prohibited from giving legal advice directly to producers. But if there's anything that we can do to work with agritourism associations or congressional staffers when you guys have questions, please feel free to reach out to us.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rusty, for highlighting some of these key liability issues for us surrounding agritourism, and for offering to serve as a resource, especially to congressional offices. We now have the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Carrie Castile, who serves as Director of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's National Institute for Food and Agriculture, or NIFA. And Dr. Castile will highlight the range of federal programs that exist to support agritourism and tell us about NIFA's important role in this regard. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you. It's a great pleasure, and to be able to highlight some of the things that we're doing at USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and our support for the agritourism industry. So it's a real treat for me. You'll hear a little bit later on. I'm from Breaux Bridge, Louisiana, which is the crawfish capital of the world. And when Lisa was talking about these fairs and festivals that have originated from agricultural products, I think it's integral that we look at how this contributes to our culture, how it contributes to agricultural literacy, as well as making those relationships and those connections to the people who produce our food and fiber. So I always think of the Hank Williams song, jambalaya, jambalaya, filet gumbo, and crawfish pies. Let me tell you, it's all in Louisiana. Agritourism is part of those discussions and part of that environment. So let me tell you a few ways in which we've partnered with the agritourism industry. But I think it's important for me also to clarify and identify what our role is at NIFA. So we partner with scientists at the state agricultural experiment station levels nationwide who study biological, economic, and social problems, food and agriculture, and related industries to the states. From there, these scientists investigate areas such as crop genetics, as well as livestock, crop precision technology, and other things. And then from there, they provide research results and up-to-date information with extension specialists. Extension specialists help inform farmers about developments in agriculture. And then most of the agricultural experiment station scientists are also faculty members of the land-grant universities. Then NIFA also partners with the Cooperative Extension Service, which is a nationwide non-credit educational network. Each U.S. state and territory has a state office at its land-grant university, and a network of local or regional offices. These offices are staffed by one or more extension agents who provide useful, practical, and research-based information to agricultural producers, small business owners, youth, consumers, and others in rural areas and communities of all sizes. So one thing that I want to talk about is within NIFA structure, where are the resources that are available to our agritourism industry and producers? So first is our capacity program. This is a program that's used in each state in which the states have the ability to be nimble and prioritize use of these funds and be able to work with the experiment stations as well as the Extension Service to develop programs as well as work directly with the producers. So these programs include our AFRI program on the, our AFRI program, which also includes extension. We also have our beginning rancher and farmer development program, our extension risk management education program, our small business innovation research program, our sustainable ag research and education program, or SARE. And so these are all programs that are available from our capacity programs and our formula funds. The other thing that we have is that I would like to highlight is a partnership that we have with our National Extension Tourism Network. It coordinates outreach and educational activities to enhance sustainable tourism development on behalf of cooperative extension and sea grants nationally. So NET, which is the National Extension Tourism Network, partners with 4 regional rural development centers to provide relevant research, training, resources, and networking opportunities in tourism, recreation, marketing, management, and development for extension, sea grant, and tourism industries professionals. At the departmental level, we've collaborated with Rural Development and Forest Service to produce a resource guide for rural communities to identify resources that develop the recreation economy. And those are also going to be included in the chat. I do want to emphasize the importance of our sister agencies. They're integral and they're bringing foundational programs and technical assistance that help us advance agritourism and recreational economies. And I'll highlight a few of those later on in my presentation. But I do want to highlight a program at the state level in which South Dakota State University Cooperative Extension Service offered an example as to how hatch funds can be used to explore opportunities that encourage, promote, and advance agritourism, including on our tribal lands. So SDSU Extension brought together partners that include the South Dakota Department of Tourism, South Dakota Department of Agriculture, South Dakota Value Added Agricultural Development Center, the South Dakota Specialty Producers, Southeast Tech, and USDA Rural Development. This blend of public and private partners illustrates how states and communities can leverage federal and state funding and expertise to create lasting sustainable networks. I'd also mentioned AFRI, which is our Agricultural Food Research Initiative. This is also an area in which we have an integrated system looking at the whole of NIFA approach, both research, extension, and education. One example as to how we've used AFRI is through a program with Penn State and the University of Vermont and Oklahoma State University that will study agritourism in the United States and develop research-based information and guidance for farmers looking to diversify their incomes through agritourism. And I believe it was already mentioned earlier. As well as an extension risk management education grant in which agritourism safety and liability that updates best management practices for the COVID-19 pandemic is already underway with the University of Vermont. And I see Lisa smiling in the corner. So these are all examples that are within USDA NIFA, but I had mentioned earlier that I want to talk about the support that we have from our sister agencies, and hopefully we have some folks on the call from the Natural Resources Conservation Service and USDA Rural Development. So I'll mention a few things, but if you have any more questions, hopefully they're online and can be able to answer some of those. So rural development. I was blessed to have an opportunity to serve as the state director for rural development in Louisiana. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we did was reached out to our agritourism professionals, as well as our farmers and ranchers, to let them know that there are resources available. So within the Rural Business Cooperative Service, including the Business and Industry Grants Loan, our Rural Economic Development Loan and Grant, our Rural Micro Entrepreneur Assistance Program, and Intermediary Relending Programs are all available to our agritourism industry. Examples include financing for lodges and hotels to upgrade facilities and improve visitor experiences, financing for small rural businesses such as restaurants, dry cleaners, or automotive repair shops, and funding to intermediary providers who relend the funds in rural communities. The Rural Business Development Grant has also been used to establish and promote county or regional maps, trails, or tours. Additionally, the USDA's value-added producer grant in rural development has potential to help producers capitalize on opportunities in agritourism. Beer and wine are among these value-added products. Lisa, I heard you mention that as well, and that the grant has funded these types of projects. So let's talk a little bit about NRCS. NRCS works directly with farmers and private landowners by offering technical and financial assistance to address their natural resource concerns. Farmers rely on the natural resources of their land, the soil, the water, and the plants and the wildlife and scenery, both to maintain production, but also to support their agritourism ventures. I know that agritourism plays a strong role in Vermont in maintaining the land's resources and enabling the development of more sustainable food systems. So NRCS in Vermont has helped many small farms establish high tunnels or other conservation practices that facilitate sustainable growing of food on the farm and for guests to enjoy as well, such as Shelburne Farms and Cedar Cycle Farm. We also have worked to assist with the vegetation management at popular privately owned recreation spots and livestock practices on farms that run educational events. And lastly, I want to communicate to you that as farmers, especially small and medium-sized farms, searching for ways to become more sustainable and more profitable, agritourism is increasingly important to you and to your operations. Agritourism also helps boost local economies in rural areas and helps to do a better job of communicating and showcasing the value of agriculture and land stewardship across diverse audiences. As someone who helped to provide support when Louisiana was developing their limit of liability laws for agritourism, I realized the importance, but also the impact that agritourism ventures can have in all of our states. And so I very much am excited to be here and to be able to support this effort, and happy to provide whatever resources that I've mentioned in my presentation.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Castile, for that excellent overview of the federal programs focused on supporting agritourism, and of course for outlining NEFA's unique role in that regard. Unfortunately, Gail Chihak, Tribal Relations and Outreach Manager at the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association, was ultimately unable to resolve a technical glitch and therefore was unable to rejoin us. However, her colleague Hannah Peterson, who serves as Program Development Director, has graciously agreed to step in to address the importance of agritourism for tribal communities. Hannah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for your patience with us, and I will do my best to step in. And again, we apologize. Gail Chihak was very sad she could not join you today. She's having some technical difficulties and works remotely. So my name is Hannah Peterson, and I am the Program Development Director here at IANTA. I'm wondering if you could help by sharing our first slide. We're presenting on agritourism in Indian country, and I'm hoping you can move to the next slide for us. Thank you for giving IANTA the time to share information about American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian agritourism. For more than 2 decades, the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association, or IANTA, has served as the national center for providing tourism and recreational travel technical assistance, training, and capacity building to American Indian nations. Our mission is to define, introduce, grow, and sustain American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian tourism that honors traditions and values. Prior to COVID, tourism, including agritourism, was a leading opportunity for jobs and economic development in Indian country. In some rural communities, it is one of the few viable opportunities for household income. There are some 80,000 Native American or Alaska Native farm producers with farm acreage of 59 million acres. And the number of Native farmers and producers is growing, outpacing the growth of all American farmers. In 2017, Native American operated farms grew by 7%, more than double the growth of American farms of 3%. For example, 20 million of the 26 million acres in Arizona involved in food and agriculture are under direct tribal control. The top 10 farms in South Dakota, Arizona, New Mexico, Oregon, Washington, California, Idaho, and more are tribal farms. And the largest contiguous farm in the US is the Navajo Agricultural Products Industry, or NAPI. Last year, IANTA published its case studies in tribal agritourism, featuring 6 tribal agritourism programs. The programs we featured were the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, the Octadahe Winton Nation in California, the Icy Strait Point in Alaska, the Santa Ana Pueblo in New Mexico, the Oneida Nation in Wisconsin, and the Seneca Nation of Indians in New York. The handbook was designed for ranchers, farmers, and other native food producers interested in sharing culture, heritage, and traditional food systems. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, in 2019, approximately 1.9 million overseas visitors traveled to an American Indian community. So by investing in native agritourism, we are also investing in sustainable practices, water protection, equitable distribution of resources to address food insecurity in our youth. And this is critical when you think about the location of most of these native farms are in rural locations and where food access is limited. So these are the needs that we see in our work in agritourism and agriculture. Working with tribes, we've heard of several needs: develop added value products, develop new markets, assistance with marketing, business skills, support, access to capital, and tourism training. We promote native food products on our website at ianta.org and on the only destination website dedicated to Native American travel, and that's nativeamerica.travel. Rebuilding the tourism economy for American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiians across the United States is critical to the broader pandemic recovery efforts. By investing in native agritourism, we are also investing in sustainable practices, water protection, and equitable distribution of resources to address food insecurity. I really thank you for your time today and your patience with us as we have addressed our various technical difficulties in this new Zoom world. Thank you again.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Hannah, for stepping in there, and apologies for the technical issues that Gail's experiencing. I would now like to open the floor to questions from our audience. And Carrie, I know that you need to leave shortly in order to join the secretary in a meeting. So if I might, I'd just like to pose a question to you before you go. You told us quite a bit about your firsthand experience in Louisiana, specifically regarding the impact of agritourism. And I was wondering if, building upon that, you could tell us a bit about your thoughts on the future of agritourism and what NEFA's role in supporting that might look like.
Thank you so much. So from my perspective, NIFA is really that connector. We help to provide the resources to our land-grant universities, as well as our stakeholders, to support agritourism ventures. From a USDA comprehensive perspective, working through NRCS, our Forest Service, as well as rural development, I think we have a great portfolio of resources that can be available to you as well. And when I worked in Louisiana, we worked very, very closely with our partners as well. The important thing, I think, and the take-home message is we got to get the information out to the people that need them. Extension Service plays an extremely valuable role, and we're going to continue to support those efforts. But we need to get the information out. From the NIFA perspective, I'm committed to making sure that these very important resources get into the hands of the people that need them. For me, in a state like Louisiana, in which people come to New Orleans to eat, and they come to eat gumbo, right? The opportunities to be able to talk about all of the different things and ingredients and culture really contribute to the agritourism conversation. And to expand that a little bit more, the ecosystem and nature-based tourism, because if we talk about alligators and we talk about crawfish and we talk about where crabs come from, all of that is based on this nature-based system that we have in place that we all come to love and recreate on in Louisiana, just like you would in Vermont with the lake. I mean, there's so many resources available. So I think that connection that we've tried to make between agritourism, the ecosystem itself, And the importance of sustaining that ecosystem is absolutely critical. And I think we've done a good job. I'd like to see more of that. And again, if there's anything that I can do to support that, I want to be able to do so. So thanks for the opportunity. I am so sorry that I have to jump off. I have a meeting to talk about the Beginning Farmers and Ranchers Development Program as well as SARE. So my apologies. I'm going to stick around for about 5 more minutes, but I do have to jump off after that.
Excellent. Well, thanks once again for those remarks, and of course for making time to join us despite your very packed program today. I would now like to pose a question to Lisa Chase from the University of Vermont Extension. Lisa, and building upon what Carrie's just said, could you talk a bit about how COVID-19 has impacted agritourism and about the projected trends for the future for agritourism?
So the pandemic was very difficult for many farms. Some of the few farms that actually did well were farms that had direct connections with their communities. So we saw this in Vermont, but we saw this all over the country and even around the world, talking with colleagues in Italy and India and South Africa as well. The farms that were able to sell direct to their communities, especially when the pandemic first hit, and there were major shortages and issues with the long supply chain and major food shortages ranging from meat to eggs to fresh fruits and vegetables, the farms that were able to sell direct. Many of them had already been doing that for quite some time. Some of them pivoted. They transitioned very quickly and figured out how to get safe, healthy food directly to their local communities. And all of a sudden, that interest in local food, which has been growing fairly steadily for quite some time, really skyrocketed. CSA shares sold out, and people who typically would get everything at a supermarket and not pay attention to where their food was coming from, all of a sudden going to a supermarket felt scary. And there was nothing that felt safer than going to a farm a few miles away. You know the farmers, you know the producers, you know your community members, and you can all really rally around that food producer. However, farms that relied on long distance travel, of course, were really devastated, along with the tourism industry. What we're seeing now, as we're thankfully coming out of the pandemic, is great demand for travel, especially to safe, healthy experiences, nature-based, farm-based experiences. And so far, the good news is demand for local food, direct sales, direct experiences seems to be very high, seems to be staying stable and even increasing. So looking at projections, not just in Vermont, but globally as well, there's a huge growth trajectory expected for agritourism moving forward. And at the University of Vermont, we've been building an international network. Ever since we were able to go to the first World Congress on Agritourism, which was held in Italy in 2018, we've been working with colleagues around the world to try to build an international network. And we're really looking forward to hosting an international conference in Vermont in August of 2022, when hopefully we'll be back open for global travel. And in the meantime, we're grateful to these opportunities to connect virtually.
Thank you, Lisa. I'd now like to pose a question to you, Rusty. What are your thoughts about legislative priorities related to agritourism? And within that, could you tell us a bit, perhaps, about the resources available to support specifically congressional staffers in this work?
So we can't, so one thing that we can't do is tell state legislatures what they should do. What we try to do, though, is we gather up all of the state laws that are in existence. I've dealt with a lot of these laws before they've been passed, while they've been in the process of going through the legislative process, and then after they've been enacted. So I can kind of serve as a resource for questions that come up. What are some of the stumbling blocks that you might run into? What things are important in these types of statutes? And as a resource like that. For a lot of the congressional staffers themselves, like I said, so much of the agritourism efforts are done on the state level. So a lot of that's just going to be, hey, we got a constituent call. I know, open up the list of resources. Rusty at the Ag Law Center's dealt with this. Let me send them their way. And that's probably one of the best services that we can provide for staffers for direct agritourism questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Rusty. I'm now going to be ambitious and take a risk and see if perhaps we can hear from Gail Chihak. Gail, can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes, hi, Gail. We're delighted that you were able to reconnect, and we don't have a great deal of time left, but I would, now that you're back, like to give you the opportunity to share with the audience your key takeaway message quite very briefly, if you could.
Sure. I think just to remind the states and other agencies that tribes are sovereign, but they know they need to work with their neighbors. And in many areas, they've developed strong partnerships, but in many other areas, they aren't connected. And we would encourage everyone to try and connect with their tribal neighbors and work together on building agritourism. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Gail. And we'll be sure to share your contact information so that those connected now can reach out to you after this event. I'd now, before we wrap up, I would like to offer an opportunity for Lisa and then Rusty to provide us with a key takeaway message for the audience. If there's one message the audience is to remember from all you've said today, what would that be?
I'll emphasize that interest in agritourism continues to grow on both the supply side and the demand side, the producers and the consumers. And we're really grateful to Senator Leahy, not only for this briefing and all the work that has happened now for decades supporting agritourism, but especially 20 years ago when Senator Leahy organized those trade missions and brought some farmers from Vermont to Italy and Ireland. And that, combined with funding from USDA NIFA, Rural Development, and other programs, that planted the seeds of successful agritourism enterprises that have contributed to vibrant rural communities and healthy ecosystems. And we are looking forward to seeing the world traveling again. And whether it's just locally within your area, get out and visit some farms. If you're not a farmer yourself, get out and visit them. And we hope that you'll come to Vermont in August of 2022. And in the meantime, when we'll follow up with an email to registrants for this briefing, and we'll include resources as well as information to stay in touch. Let's keep this conversation going and continue to build and expand the support network that we have for producers involved in agritourism. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Lisa. Over to you, Rusty, very briefly.
And I would say agritourism is an extremely exciting endeavor to get into. One thing that I would recommend is that people join state agritourism associations, work with cooperative extension, really think about some of the potential challenges for marketing and legal aspects on the front end before you dive in. And that research on the front end is going to serve you well. Like the old saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Thank you, Rusty. So unfortunately, our time is nearing its end. I hope that you've all enjoyed this program as much as I have. I think our speakers have covered a great deal of territory and that we've learned quite a lot in just 1 hour. We've learned, and I'll do my best to briefly summarize some of what we've learned, that agritourism is an important strategy for rural community development, and that the enterprises it supports at the farm community tourism nexus allow producers to diversify their operations while preserving the working landscape, creating jobs, maintaining farming traditions, sustaining cultural identities, contributing to food security, educating the public about agriculture and providing outdoor spaces for communities. We also learned that challenges for farmers and producers within agritourism include concerns about liability as covered by Rusty, marketing, food safety, e-connectivity, and business technical assistance, among other issues. And in addition, we learned, however, that many of these challenges are being addressed at the federal level, as Carrie highlighted, also at the state and local levels. And the resources discussed today are going to be shared with you after this event, as mentioned by Lisa. So in conclusion, or in closing, on behalf of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and the University of Vermont Extension, with critical support from the Office of U.S. Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont, I would again like to thank all of you for joining today's virtual congressional briefing on agritourism, resources for COVID-19 recovery, and farm viability. In particular, I would like to thank all of you for your excellent participation and engagement in this discussion, especially congressional staffers. And of course, I would very much like to thank our outstanding cast of speakers. So once again, we will follow up with all of the resources shared during this event. But until then, and in the meantime, stay safe and stay tuned. Thank you.